Alex adjusted the tripod one final time, checking the angle of the camera through the viewfinder. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the dusty floors of the farmhouse, creating the perfect atmospheric lighting for what would surely be another successful debunking video. The notification bell on their phone had been going off constantly since they'd announced this investigation. Their 2.3 million subscribers were hungry for content, and Alex never disappointed. The drive to the property had taken 3 hours through increasingly remote countryside, past abandoned farms and overgrown fields that spoke of a region slowly surrendering to time. The Blackwood farmhouse sat at the end of a quarter-mile dirt road, surrounded by ancient oak trees that seemed to lean inward, creating a natural canopy that filtered the sunlight into shifting patterns of gold and shadow. The house itself was larger than Alex had expected from the grainy photos in the inheritance documents, a 2-story Victorian structure with wraparound porches and ornate gingerbread trim that had somehow survived decades of neglect. Local research had revealed a treasure trove of folklore surrounding the property. The town's historical society had been eager to share stories passed down through generations. Lights moving through the house at night when no one was home, the sound of machinery running in the basement despite no electrical connections, and most intriguingly, reports of the house breathing during storms, as if it were somehow alive. "All right, everyone." Alex spoke to the camera, their voice carrying the confident, measured tone that had made Rational Revelations one of YouTube's most trusted paranormal debunking channels. Today we're exploring the supposedly haunted Blackwood farmhouse, which I recently inherited from a great-aunt I never met. Local legends claim this place has been plagued by unexplained phenomena for over a century. Mysterious sounds, objects moving on their own, and whispers in the walls. The inheritance itself had been a surprise. Alex's great-aunt Millicent had been a reclusive woman who had purchased the property in the 1970s, but never actually lived there, instead maintaining it from a distance through local caretakers. The lawyer handling the estate had seemed almost relieved to find someone willing to take possession of the property, mentioning that it had been difficult to keep caretakers due to the unusual circumstances surrounding the house. Alex picked up their tablet, scrolling through the research they'd compiled. Built in 1897 by one Ezra Blackwood, an engineer who apparently disappeared shortly after construction was completed. The house has changed hands 17 times since then, with most owners lasting less than 2 years. The current local folklore includes everything from residual hauntings to portal theories. They roll their eyes slightly. As you all know, I've investigated over 300 allegedly supernatural locations, and I've yet to find a single phenomenon that can't be explained by natural causes, psychological factors, or simple fraud. The research had been particularly thorough for this investigation. Alex had spent weeks combing through historical records, newspaper archives, and local government documents. Ezra Blackwood had been something of an enigma even in his own time, a brilliant engineer who had made significant contributions to early industrial water management systems before suddenly withdrawing from public life to build his isolated farmhouse. His disappearance in 1898 had made local headlines, with search parties combing the surrounding wilderness for weeks before giving up. What made the case particularly intriguing was the consistency of reports across different decades. Unlike many allegedly haunted locations, where stories evolved and embellished over time, the Blackwood house phenomena had remained remarkably consistent. The same sounds, the same types of mysterious movements, the same sense of an active presence within the walls. It was almost as if whatever was happening in the house was following a specific pattern or schedule. The camera captured Alex's methodical approach as they began their tour. They dressed practically: dark jeans, a fitted black t-shirt, and sturdy boots that wouldn't creak on the old floorboards. Their shoulder-length brown hair was pulled back in a neat ponytail, and they wore minimal makeup, preferring their viewers to focus on the investigation rather than their appearance. The faceless nature of their channel meant they'd built their reputation purely on credibility and thorough research. The interior of the house was a study in preserved Victorian elegance, though dust and neglect had dulled its original grandeur. High ceilings with ornate molding, hardwood floors that still gleamed beneath the grime, and tall windows that filled the rooms with natural light. The furniture was covered in white sheets, creating ghostly silhouettes that would have been perfect for a horror movie set. But Alex saw past the atmospheric elements to the underlying structure, the solid construction, the quality materials, the attention to detail that spoke of serious craftsmanship. Let's start with the ground floor, Alex continued, walking through what had once been a parlor. Notice the settling patterns in the wood. This house is over 125 years old, and thermal expansion alone would account for the majority of reported mysterious sounds. They pointed their flashlight at the baseboards, where gaps had formed over the decades. Air currents through these spaces could easily create whispers or rustling sounds, especially at night when temperature differentials are most pronounced. The parlor was furnished with pieces that appeared to be original to the house: a horsehair sofa, a mahogany side table, and a grandfather clock that had long since stopped ticking. Alex made note of each item, explaining how settling furniture and contracting wood could create the groans and creaks that previous owners had attributed to supernatural activity. Their EMF detector remained silent, showing no electromagnetic anomalies that might indicate electrical problems or hidden wiring. As they moved through the rooms, Alex maintained their usual systematic approach. They tested floorboards for creaks, examined windows for drafts, and used their EMF detector to measure electromagnetic fields. The dining room revealed evidence of water damage along one wall, which Alex documented as a potential source for settling sounds. The library, with its built-in bookshelves and reading nook, showed signs of small animal habitation, mouse droppings that could explain scurrying sounds reported by previous owners. Everything was proceeding exactly as expected, until they entered the kitchen. "That's interesting," Alex muttered, crouching down near the sink. On the windowsill sat 5 perfectly smooth river stones, arranged in what appeared to be a deliberate pattern. They were roughly the same size, about 2 inches in diameter, and polished to an almost mirror finish. The arrangement formed a precise pentagon, with each stone positioned exactly the same distance from its neighbors. These definitely weren't mentioned in any of the previous reports. Alex picked up one of the stones, turning it over in their hands. It was surprisingly heavy for its size, and warm to the touch despite the cool interior of the house. The surface was flawless, as if it had been machine polished rather than naturally smoothed by water erosion. More intriguingly, it seemed to have a faint luminescence, barely visible in the afternoon light, but definitely present. Could be a previous owner's collection, or perhaps left by local children. River stones this smooth would have taken years of natural erosion to achieve this finish, Alex explained to the camera, though their voice carried a note of uncertainty. The stones were too perfect, too precisely arranged to be casual decoration. And that subtle glow, they'd need to examine it more closely after dark to determine if it was real or an optical illusion. They placed the stone back in its position and continued the tour, but something about the arrangement nagged at them. The stones hadn't been placed randomly. There was definitely a pattern, though Alex couldn't immediately identify what it might represent. The spacing was too precise, the orientation too deliberate. It reminded them of something they'd seen before, but the memory remained frustratingly elusive. The second floor proved equally mundane at first glance, with the usual collection of creaky floorboards and loose window frames that could explain most reported phenomena. The master bedroom contained a 4-poster bed with dusty curtains and a wardrobe that groaned when opened. Alex documented everything methodically, providing rational explanations for each potential source of mysterious sounds or movements. The bathroom revealed old plumbing that could certainly account for strange noises, especially the large clawfoot tub with its original fixtures. But it was in the smallest bedroom, tucked under the eaves at the back of the house, that Alex found the second stone arrangement. This one was different, 7 stones arranged in a perfect circle on the windowsill, each one slightly smaller than those in the kitchen. The pattern was more complex, with subtle variations in the positioning that suggested some kind of coding or symbolic meaning. "This is definitely not random," Alex said, their confidence wavering slightly. "Someone has been placing these stones in specific patterns. Could be the work of local teenagers, urban explorers, or even someone trying to create a hoax." But even as they spoke, Alex knew the explanation felt inadequate. The house was isolated, surrounded by a tall fence with a locked gate. There were no signs of forced entry, no footprints in the dust, no indication that anyone else had been in the building recently. More troubling was the fact that the stones appeared to be responding to their presence. The subtle glow Alex had noticed in the kitchen was becoming more pronounced as evening approached, and now they could see that the stones in the bedroom were exhibiting the same luminescence. It was faint but unmistakable, a soft, blue-green light that seemed to pulse gently, like a slow heartbeat. Alex's confidence was shaken but not broken when they decided to check the basement. They'd encountered hoaxes before, elaborate setups designed to fool investigators or create viral content. The phosphorescent stones could be explained by modern chemistry, and the precise arrangements might be the work of someone with access to the property. But the nagging feeling that they were missing something important continued to grow. The wooden stairs groaned under their weight as they descended, the camera's LED light cutting through the darkness. The basement was larger than Alex had expected, with stone walls that looked original to the house and a packed dirt floor that showed no recent disturbance. The air was surprisingly fresh, not musty and stagnant as they'd anticipated, with a subtle current that suggested good ventilation. "The ventilation down here is actually quite good," Alex observed, sweeping their flashlight across the space. "There must be some kind of natural air circulation system. That could explain why previous owners reported feeling, watched, or sensing a presence. Changes in air pressure and circulation can create subtle psychological effects that the subconscious mind interprets as supernatural activity." The basement contained the usual collection of abandoned items, old farming equipment, wooden crates, a coal bin that hadn't been used in decades. But as Alex explored the space more thoroughly, they began to notice details that didn't fit the typical pattern of basement storage. The stone walls were too well maintained, the ventilation too effective, the whole space too organized despite its apparent abandonment. It was then that Alex noticed something that made them pause the recording. In the far corner of the basement, partially hidden behind what looked like old farming equipment, was another arrangement of river stones. This time, there were 9 of them, arranged in a perfect circle about 3 feet in diameter. But this arrangement was different from the others. The stones were larger, and they were definitely glowing with that same blue-green luminescence, bright enough now to be clearly visible even in the flashlight beam. "This is definitely not random," Alex said, resuming recording with a voice that betrayed growing excitement and concern. "Someone has been placing these stones in specific patterns throughout the house. But this arrangement is much more elaborate than the others, and the luminescence is significantly stronger." They photographed the arrangement from multiple angles, making careful notes about the positioning and spacing. As they knelt beside the stone circle, Alex noticed something else that made their pulse quicken. The ground within the circle was different, not packed earth like the rest of the basement floor, but smooth stone that seemed to have been carefully fitted together. It was almost like a hidden floor panel, though there was no obvious way to open it. As they headed back upstairs, Alex couldn't shake the feeling that they were missing something crucial. The stone arrangements were too deliberate, too carefully placed to be mere decoration or pranks. And the luminescence was real, not a trick of the light or optical illusion, but genuine bioluminescence of some kind. But what could possibly cause river stones to glow? And why were they arranged in these specific patterns throughout the house? The questions multiplied as Alex reviewed their footage and prepared for the next phase of the investigation. They'd documented dozens of allegedly haunted locations, and they never encountered anything quite like this. The phenomena were too consistent, too purposeful to be natural anomalies, yet too sophisticated to be simple hoaxes. The backyard revealed another surprise that deepened the mystery. The old well that Alex had noticed in the property photos was in remarkably good condition, with stone walls that looked as if they'd been maintained recently. The iron pump handle was still functional, and the wooden cover was solid and well-fitted. It was far too well-preserved for a structure that had supposedly been abandoned for decades. "That's unusual," Alex admitted, setting up their equipment to measure the well's depth. According to the geological survey, the water table in this area should be at least 40 feet down. This well appears to be much shallower, and it's in exceptionally good condition for its age. They attached a weighted line to their measuring tape and lowered it into the well, counting off the feet as it descended. 22 feet. The water was only 22 feet down, and when Alex tested it with their portable pH meter, it registered as perfectly neutral and surprisingly cold. The temperature reading was 52 degrees Fahrenheit, far cooler than the ambient air temperature and consistent with deep spring water. They filled a small sample bottle, noting that the water was crystal clear and odorless, with no signs of contamination or stagnation. "This is actually excellent water quality," Alex said, genuinely puzzled. "Better than most municipal supplies. For a well that's supposedly been and used for decades, this is remarkable preservation. The water temperature and clarity suggest it's being fed by a deep aquifer or natural spring, which contradicts the geological survey data." As they stood beside the well, Alex became aware of a sound they hadn't noticed before, a very faint, rhythmic humming that seemed to come from the water itself. They leaned closer, holding their breath to eliminate any interference from their own breathing. The humming was definitely there, low and consistent, like a distant motor running at a steady RPM. The sound was too regular to be natural. Running water, wind, or settling wouldn't create such a consistent pattern. Alex activated their audio recorder, adjusting the sensitivity to capture the subtle sound. The frequency was steady, almost musical, with undertones that suggested a complex mechanical source. "There's definitely some kind of mechanical source for this sound," Alex said, their investigative instincts fully engaged. "Could be an old pump system, though I haven't seen any electrical connections. We'll need to analyze this audio back at the studio." But even as they spoke, Alex knew this was unlike anything they'd encountered before. The sound was too sophisticated, too purposeful to be the product of decaying machinery or natural phenomena. The sun was setting as Alex finished their initial exploration, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that cast long shadows across the property. The isolation of the house became more apparent as darkness approached. No neighboring lights, no sounds of traffic or human activity, just the gentle whisper of wind through the oak trees and that persistent, subtle humming from the well. Alex had decided to spend the night in the house to capture any nocturnal phenomena, a standard practice that had provided compelling evidence for their debunking videos. They'd done this hundreds of times before, and it always yielded the most interesting results. Most allegedly supernatural activity occurred at night, when natural sounds were amplified by silence and psychological factors were heightened by darkness and isolation. The setup was methodical and professional. Alex positioned cameras at strategic angles to capture the entire main floor, with motion sensors and audio recorders in key locations. Their laptop was loaded with monitoring software that would alert them to any unusual activity, and they kept backup equipment ready in case of technical failures. They'd learned from experience that the most interesting phenomena often occurred when primary equipment malfunctioned. Their sleeping bag was positioned in the main parlor, where they had clear sight lines to multiple rooms and easy access to their equipment. The spot also provided a good view of the kitchen, where the first stone arrangement had been discovered. If someone was accessing the property to manipulate the stones, Alex would be in position to document it. The first few hours passed quietly, with Alex documenting the normal settling sounds of the old house. The structure creaked and groaned as it cooled after the day's heat, and they recorded each sound, explaining the thermal dynamics that caused wood to expand and contract. A family of mice had made their home in the walls, providing the scurrying sounds that previous owners had attributed to supernatural activity. Everything was proceeding exactly as expected until around midnight, when Alex noticed the first significant change. The river stones in the kitchen had begun to glow more brightly, their blue-green luminescence now clearly visible even from the parlor. The effect was subtle but unmistakable, like watching stars emerge as the sky darkened. "Interesting development," Alex whispered to their handheld recorder, keeping their voice low to avoid disturbing the house's natural acoustics. "The luminescence of the stones is increasing with darkness. This could be a natural phosphorescent reaction, possibly triggered by temperature changes or the absence of light. Several minerals exhibit this property, though it's unusual to find them in river stones." But as Alex watched, the phenomenon became more complex. The stones weren't just glowing. They were pulsing, their light waxing and waning in a slow, steady rhythm. The pattern was hypnotic, almost like breathing, and it seemed to be synchronized across all the stone arrangements in the house. From their position in the parlor, Alex could see similar pulsing lights in the upstairs bedroom and what appeared to be a much brighter glow emanating from the basement. Then, around 2:30 a.m., the tapping began. Alex woke instantly, their trained ears immediately focusing on the sound. It was coming from the walls, not the random creaking and settling they'd documented earlier, but a deliberate, rhythmic tapping that seemed to follow a specific pattern. 3 short taps, followed by a pause, then 3 more. The pattern repeated every 30 seconds or so, always from the same general direction. "Okay, that's definitely not natural," Alex whispered to their handheld recorder, keeping their voice low to avoid masking the sound. Rhythmic tapping, consistent interval, appears to be coming from the wall between the parlor and kitchen. The pattern is too regular to be caused by thermal expansion or settling. They moved carefully toward the source, using their flashlight to examine the wall construction. The tapping continued, unaffected by their presence, and Alex pressed their ear to the wall to pinpoint the exact location. The sound was coming from inside the wall itself, but it wasn't the random noise of pipes or rodents. There was intelligence behind it, a deliberate pattern that suggested mechanical origin. The wall was constructed of traditional lathe and plaster over hand-hewn wooden studs, typical of late 19th century construction. But as Alex examined it more closely, they noticed subtle differences from the other walls in the house. The plaster was slightly different in texture, and there were small variations in the spacing of the wooden lath that suggested this wall had been modified or rebuilt at some point. Alex tapped back, 3 quick raps against the wall with their knuckles. The tapping stopped immediately. The silence was profound, broken only by the soft hum of Alex's recording equipment and the distant sound of wind in the trees outside. Alex waited, their heart rate increasing despite their rational mind insisting there had to be a logical explanation. After nearly a minute of silence, the tapping resumed, but this time the pattern was different. 3 taps, pause, 2 taps, pause, 3 taps again. The pattern changed in response to my interaction, Alex recorded, their voice betraying a mixture of excitement and concern. This suggests some kind of mechanical system that's sensitive to vibration or sound. Could be a pressure valve, expansion joint, or even an old speaking tube system. But the sophistication of the response suggests something more complex than simple mechanical resonance. Alex spent the next hour documenting the tapping patterns, discovering that the system was remarkably responsive to various stimuli. Loud noises would make the tapping stop temporarily, while gentle taps on different parts of the wall would sometimes alter the rhythm or frequency. Most intriguingly, the tapping seemed to be communicating, responding to patterns with variations that suggested some form of mechanical intelligence. As the night progressed, Alex became aware of other sounds throughout the house. The humming from the well had grown stronger, now audible even from inside the building. There were subtle creaking sounds from the floors above, not random settling but purposeful movements that seemed to follow the same rhythmic patterns as the wall tapping. The house itself seemed to be awakening, responding to Alex's presence with increasingly complex mechanical symphonies. The stone arrangements throughout the house were now glowing brightly enough to provide actual illumination, their blue-green light pulsing in synchronization with the tapping patterns. The effect was beautiful and deeply unsettling, like being inside a living organism that was slowly becoming aware of an intruder. As dawn approached, Alex reviewed their recordings and tried to make sense of what they'd experienced. The tapping had stopped with the sunrise, suggesting it was triggered by darkness or temperature changes. The stone luminescence had faded back to barely visible levels, and the various mechanical sounds had quieted to their daytime levels. But the evidence was overwhelming. Something complex and purposeful was operating within the house, something that had been designed to respond to human presence. "This is unlike anything I've encountered in over 300 investigations," Alex said, speaking directly to the camera as morning light streamed through the windows. "The phenomena are too sophisticated, too purposeful to be natural anomalies. But they're also too consistent and mechanical to be supernatural." We're dealing with something that was designed and built, something that's been operating for decades, possibly over a century. The implications were staggering. If the house contained some kind of hidden mechanical system, it would represent a remarkable achievement in 19th century engineering. But why would someone build such a system? And how had it remained operational for so long without maintenance or external power? Alex decided to focus on the more tangible aspects of the mystery. The wall tapping was the most consistent and interactive phenomenon, and if they could identify its source, it might provide clues to the rest of the system. They'd brought tools for minor demolition work, planning to carefully expose sections of wall if necessary to examine the interior construction. But first, they needed to address the growing collection of river stones throughout the house. During their night vigil, Alex had discovered two more arrangements, one in the upstairs hallway and another in what had once been a study. Each arrangement was different in size and pattern, but all featured the same perfectly smooth, luminescent stones. More troubling was the fact that Alex was certain these stones hadn't been there during their initial exploration the previous day. Someone is definitely accessing this property, Alex concluded, though their voice lacked conviction. The stone arrangements are expanding, which means there's a human element to this investigation. But I've found no evidence of forced entry, no footprints, no signs of recent human activity other than the stones themselves. The logical explanation felt increasingly hollow. The house was isolated, surrounded by a fence and gate that showed no signs of tampering. The dust patterns on the floors were undisturbed except for Alex's own footprints, and there were no vehicle tracks on the dirt road leading to the property. Yet the stones continued to appear, arranged in patterns that seemed almost mathematical in their precision. Apping stopped immediately. Alex waited, their heart rate increasing despite their rational mind insisting there had to be a logical explanation. After nearly a minute of silence, the tapping resumed, but this time the pattern was different. 3 taps, pause, 2 taps, pause, 3 taps again. The pattern changed in response to my interaction, Alex recorded, their voice betraying a hint of excitement. This suggests some kind of mechanical system that's sensitive to vibration or sound. Could be a pressure valve, expansion joint, or even an old speaking tube system. Alex spent the next hour documenting the tapping patterns, noting that they seemed to respond to various stimuli. Loud noises would make them stop temporarily, while gentle taps on the wall would sometimes alter the rhythm. It was fascinating from a purely mechanical standpoint, even if it completely contradicted the paranormal claims. As dawn approached, Alex reviewed their recordings and made plans for day 2. The tapping had stopped with the sunrise, suggesting it was triggered by temperature changes or other environmental factors. They'd need to examine the wall construction more carefully and possibly access the interior spaces to identify the mechanical source. But first, they needed to address the growing collection of river stones. Alex had found 3 more arrangements during their night vigil, one in the upstairs hallway, one in the basement, and another in what had once been a bedroom. Each arrangement was different, but all featured the same perfectly smooth stones. More importantly, Alex was certain these stones hadn't been there during their initial exploration the previous day. Someone is definitely accessing this property, Alex concluded, speaking directly to the camera. The stone arrangements are expanding, which means there's a human element to this investigation. Could be local teenagers, urban explorers, or someone specifically trying to create a hoax for my channel. The logical explanation felt hollow, even to Alex. The house was isolated, surrounded by a tall fence with a locked gate. There were no signs of forced entry, no footprints in the dust, no indication that anyone else had been in the building. Yet the stones continued to appear, arranged in patterns that seemed almost mathematical in their precision. Alex decided to focus on the more tangible mystery, the tapping in the walls. They'd brought a small sledgehammer and pry bar, planning to carefully expose a section of the wall to examine the interior construction. If there was a mechanical source for the sounds, they'd find it. The wall between the parlor and kitchen was original to the house, constructed with hand-hewn beams and horsehair plaster. Alex selected a spot where the tapping was most pronounced and began carefully removing the plaster. The work was slow and methodical, preserving as much of the original construction as possible. What they found beneath the plaster was unlike anything they'd encountered in their years of investigations. The wall cavity contained an intricate network of brass pipes, none larger than a pencil, arranged in complex geometric patterns. The pipes were connected to what appeared to be a small mechanical device, roughly the size of a shoebox, constructed from brass and steel components. The device was clearly handmade, with precision-machined parts that spoke of exceptional craftsmanship. "This is incredible," Alex breathed, their flashlight illuminating the mechanism. "This appears to be some kind of pressure-driven mechanical system, possibly pneumatic or hydraulic. The craftsmanship is absolutely extraordinary. This would have been cutting-edge engineering in the 1890s. The device was still operational, with small moving parts that responded to air pressure changes. Alex could see tiny valves opening and closing, creating the rhythmic tapping sounds as pressurized air moved through the system. But where was the air pressure coming from? Following the brass pipes led Alex on a journey through the house's hidden infrastructure. The pipes ran behind walls, under floors, and through ceiling spaces, creating a network that connected every room. Some pipes were wider than others, and all were constructed with the same extraordinary attention to detail. The trail led inevitably to the well. Alex had suspected the well was more than it appeared, but the reality exceeded their wildest expectations. The stone walls weren't just decorative. They concealed a complex mechanical system that had been operating continuously for over a century. Hidden behind carefully fitted stones were pumps, filters, and pressure regulators, all powered by the natural flow of water through the system. The well wasn't drawing from a shallow aquifer. It was the heart of a sophisticated water management system that extended deep underground. "This is absolutely revolutionary," Alex said, their voice filled with genuine awe. "What we're looking at is a completely self-sustaining water purification and distribution system, designed and built in the 1890s. The engineering principles are so advanced that they wouldn't be out of place in a modern facility." The river stones, Alex realized, weren't random decorations. They were part of a bioluminescent filtration system, each stone containing phosphorescent minerals that activated when exposed to specific water conditions. The arrangements throughout the house weren't patterns, they were indicators, showing the status of different components within the system. As Alex explored deeper into the well's hidden mechanisms, they discovered a waterproof compartment built into the stone wall. Inside were detailed blueprints, construction notes, and a leather-bound journal, all perfectly preserved after more than a century. The journal belonged to Ezra Blackwood, the original builder of the house. As Alex read his meticulous notes, a picture emerged of a man who was decades ahead of his time. Blackwood had been obsessed with creating a truly self-sufficient home, one that could operate independently of external resources while maintaining the highest standards of comfort and functionality. The house was designed to communicate with its inhabitants, Alex read aloud from Blackwood's journal. "Every sound, every movement, every subtle change in the environment carries information about the system's operation. The residence becomes a living entity, expressing its needs and achievements through a language of mechanical poetry." The ghostly whispers, reported by previous owners, weren't supernatural phenomena. They were the house's way of communicating. The acoustic channels built into the walls carried the sounds of the system throughout the building, creating a constant, subtle dialogue between the house and its inhabitants. The tapping patterns weren't random. They were status reports, indicating everything from water pressure to filter efficiency. Alex spent the next several hours documenting the system in detail, their respect for Ezra Blackwood growing with each discovery. The man had been a true visionary, creating technology that was still operational after more than a century. The house wasn't haunted. It was alive with the brilliance of human engineering. The bioluminescent stones were perhaps the most impressive feature. Blackwood had discovered that certain minerals would glow when exposed to specific chemical conditions, creating a natural indicator system that required no external power source. The stones throughout the house were monitoring everything from water quality to air purity, their subtle glow providing real-time feedback about the system's performance. "This changes everything," Alex said, looking directly into the camera. "For years, I've been debunking supernatural claims, always finding mundane explanations for mysterious phenomena. But this is far more extraordinary than any ghost story. This is proof that human ingenuity can create wonders that seem impossible, even magical. The emotional impact of the discovery was overwhelming. Alex had spent their career being skeptical, always looking for the logical explanation, the rational cause. But standing in the presence of Blackwood's masterpiece, they felt something they'd never experienced before, genuine wonder at the incredible achievements of human creativity. The house had been trying to communicate with every owner who had lived there, sharing its secrets through the language Blackwood had designed. The tragedy was that no one had understood what they were hearing. The whispers, the tapping, the glowing stones, all of it was an invitation to discover the marvels hidden within the walls. Alex's channel would never be the same. Instead of debunking the supernatural, they would now be dedicated to uncovering the incredible achievements of forgotten geniuses. The Blackwood House would become the first in a series investigating lost technologies, hidden innovations, and the brilliant minds who had shaped the world in ways history had forgotten. As the sun set on their second day in the house, Alex sat beside the well, listening to its gentle hum with new appreciation. The sound wasn't mysterious or supernatural. It was the heartbeat of a masterpiece, the rhythm of a machine that had been faithfully serving its purpose for over a century. Ezra Blackwood disappeared shortly after completing this house, Alex said, reading from the journal's final entry. He wrote that his greatest achievement wasn't the mechanical system itself, but the hope that someday, someone would understand what he had created. Someone who would appreciate the beauty of engineering that transcends mere function to become art. Alex looked directly into the camera, their eyes bright with excitement and purpose. I think I finally understand what he meant. This house isn't just a residence, it's a testament to human potential. It's proof that with enough creativity, dedication, and vision, we can create wonders that seem impossible. The Blackwood House has been waiting for over a century for someone to hear its story. Today, finally, someone listened. The implications extended far beyond a single YouTube video. Alex had stumbled upon one of the most significant archaeological discoveries in modern history, a perfectly preserved example of Victorian-era sustainable technology that was decades ahead of its time. The house would need to be studied, preserved, and shared with the world. But perhaps most importantly, Alex had found their true calling. Not as a debunker of mysteries, but as a revealer of forgotten truths. The world was full of incredible achievements waiting to be rediscovered, brilliant minds whose contributions had been lost to time. The Blackwood House was just the beginning. As they packed their equipment and prepared to leave, Alex took one last look at the river stones arranged on the kitchen windowsill. They were glowing softly in the twilight, their phosphorescent minerals activated by the optimal water conditions in the system. It was beautiful, purposeful, and entirely logical. Everything Alex had always sought in their investigations. The house had finally found someone who understood its language, someone who could tell its story to the world. The whispers in the walls weren't calling for help. They were sharing the secrets of a genius who had built something extraordinary and then vanished into history, leaving behind only his masterpiece and the hope that someday, someone would listen. Alex drove away from the Blackwood House with a sense of purpose they'd never experienced before. Their channel would evolve, their audience would grow, and their mission would expand. But the core message would remain the same. The truth is always more extraordinary than fiction, and the greatest mysteries are solved not by dismissing the impossible, but by discovering the brilliant minds who made the impossible real. The Blackwood House would become a monument to human ingenuity, a place where people could come to understand that the most incredible stories aren't about ghosts or supernatural phenomena, but about the extraordinary achievements of ordinary people who dared to dream beyond the limitations of their time. And in the end, that was the most remarkable discovery of all.